The public hearing. The Secretary will make note of the roll, and for those of you who may not know all of us, I'd like to have you know each of our members. Rick Garnett is our attorney. Jim Parsons, member. Sherry Holmes, member. Myself, Frank Reed. Fred Chai. Lisa Parker. And Dick Fisher, members. I'm sorry, I don't have your name. Janine. And Evie Walters, our executive secretary. We have one appearance request. That is Stan Erickson. I know that Stan needs to get on back home. And I appreciate you taking the time, the effort, and the energy to be here, to bring your thoughts to us. And Stan, you have the floor.
Thank you. I find substantive, one objection that is substantive in nature, and I think it's important enough so that people don't correct it. I might even take up cudgels and papers and advertising to tell people to vote against the charter. And that's section 1005, where you state the assembly shall approve the budget, the school district budget may be increased or decreased only as the total amount. The assembly shall approve the budget as amended and appropriate the necessary funds at least 21 days prior to the end of the fiscal year. I'm sure that you discussed this and argued about it, the matter of the line item veto power. It seems to me that I've got several reasons for it. I've observed the school district only casually in the last several years. I used to pay close attention to it, and my wife was a teacher. Finally, it got back to her that I was against the school district. I was told by my teacher wife that I either got rid of the school district or she quit teaching, and that her income was much more important to me than my criticisms and my championing the public interest in the school district. So I retired. But now that after she is retired, I have been examining the school district somewhat, but only casually. And I've seen, I remember I used to, in the past few years, I'd go into a grocery store right at the Kitty Corner from my place. And during the noon hour, I would see so many, I knew a lot of the consultants and the officials in the school district, the administrative officers, especially consultants. And I would see them in there shopping during the noon hours, and I knew damn well they weren't taking any half-hour lunch period. Then I did ask some questions. Do you have any quantitative measurement of consultants and your special professional aides' work? Even quantitatively, do you measure it? I find there was very little measurement of their performance, even quantitatively. I can really understand that it's hard to measure their quality of work, but that's the escape principle of the escape mechanism that the school district uses, the school administrators use. You can't measure education qualitatively, but they don't even do it quantitatively. And now I'm not too sure my grounds here, but as I understand it, and I watched the city budget very carefully, and I watched the borough budget somewhat carefully, and a test of a budget is whether or not the budget, at the time, you see what happens is the government agency sets up a budget, and then it executes it. And then the auditors come along, the independent auditors that are hired by the assembly and the city council, by the city council. They come along and they check it and say what you actually spent. The test of whether you have a good budgeting system or not, a good management, is how close the actual expenditures adhere to the budget. Well, the city of Anchorage, except for in the area of its utilities, which are manipulated around very grossly by the city council, in its general governmental functions, the expenditures very closely, only within a few percent of the budgeted amount as reported in the official audit. And that is to a great extent true in the borough but it is not true in the school budget. They manipulate those figures all around, and they have no control except the school district school board. And the school district school board has always been, in my opinion, seduced by the administration. With due apologies to you and Carson, who served on it. Didn't you serve on that school district too? Boy, they gave you a run for your money too. And you know as well as I do that school administrators, they seduce these school board members. Education is holy and you can't manipulate it. I think they need a check and balance. Especially they can get it through the line item veto power that the Assembly has in all except the school district budget. The City Council, you might set up a department. You consider a department in the city or a department in the borough. Each of them set up their own budgets, propose their own budgets, and then the manager in the city approves it, and it goes to council. And then the council, in many cases, takes line item veto power on a lot of it. And but that doesn't happen in the school board budget. They can't do it. It goes to the city, it goes to the school to the assembly, and it's a take it or leave it proposition as part of the assembly. Well, they can't. It doesn't do them even any good to criticize some of the areas because they either approve the whole budget or give them no money. And those fellows out there in the school district, I understand now. I haven't documented this too closely, but they just about blackmailed the assembly. They proposed when it was proposed that the school district budget be cut by a total amount in one instead of giving several $1 million, you cut it to $100,000. You know what the school district said it would do? It said it would cut the data processing area. Well, the data processing area is one in which both the school district and the borough share. And the school district has, I guess, a bigger chunk of it than the borough does. So the result would be that they would cripple the borough in its general governmental functions by the school district cutting out data processing people in the data processing function. So I think you need that check on the school district, and I think you need it through the method of a line item veto power. So I would strongly urge that you reconsider your second go-around on this. You reconsider that and think of the total public good. And don't let those school district people and school administrators floor you on this holiness of education. They spend, practically half of the money spent in taxes, the cost of taxes is in the area of the schools. So they certainly should be subject to some controls that wouldn't exist in this charter as you proposed it. The rest of my criticisms and questions aren't very substantive, such as that one, but let me give them to you. I concur with your proposal that the mayor have the authority for appointing and removing all except specified officers, which is not the case in the existing city of Anchorage. Such powers being specified for the city manager. But I do think you should change that word manager to that which is more commonly used now in cases of similar organizational structures where the mayor has the power to hire and fire department heads. He does need a deputy, but don't call him a manager. I'll tell you why. Because we've been so accustomed to a city manager who has that authority to hire and fire that it'll be hard for people to reconcile themselves to the fact that we've got a new system here that he really is not a manager. The manager is the mayor because he has the power, he has the authority and the final responsibility and the final authority. Therefore, you should call the manager by a different name. Now, the name that is coming into play in other places where you have similar situations, such as I think Oakland, California, is a city administrator or chief administrative officer. I think that word implies much less in the way of authority than using the term as you proposed it. He actually is a deputy. In fact, in your charter, you say that if, I believe, I don't recall exactly where it is, but in case of absence of the mayor, doesn't the manager take hold? So he is in effect a deputy. He can act in his absence. So give him a name if you can't. If you've got to have that word manager in there, call him a deputy. Deputy mayor, but administrative officer would be a much better title to use. You should clean up the language about in paragraph 1003. Since the mayor will be submitting the budget for each separate for each separate entity, the school district and the rest of the borough, at separate times. July 1st and January 1st in fiscal years, you should clarify the language there, and I would insert at the in that section, let me find it right here, 1003. When I come to the place where I add language, I'll tell you. The mayor shall submit to the assembly at least 90 days, now here's my entrance of words, before the end of the fiscal year of each budget, before the end of the fiscal year for each fiscal year, the proposed 6-year program. The mayor shall submit with each budget and analysis and so on, so that you clearly specify that they are 2 budgets and 2 separate submissions. You generalized it in just using a singular amount, a singular phrasing here, and you should clarify that. Is that the criticism that accountant has to you today, Frank?
No, this actually contemplates a submission of the budget at one time, because you have one taxing period. It does contemplate different fiscal years for the 2 bodies, but it does contemplate one taxing year. So it does contemplate a single submission. Am I correct in that?
Well, then my criticism is not germane. You think it's adequately covered enough?
We hope
you don't think that it would lead to some legal complications there? Specify it this way.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Fisher?
I'm not sure, Stan, that I understand your criticism.
Stan was saying that because the budget, the fiscal years of the school district is June 30 to July 1, or July 1 to June 30, and the fiscal year of the new governmental body would be December 31, or January 1 to December 31, that there are 2 budgets being submitted at different times. But if that is not the case, there will be 1 budget submitted, including both. One will be for 1 fiscal year, and the other for the overlapping fiscal year, but there will be 1 taxing year that will serve those.
Well, won't that be very difficult to do, because you're finding the expenditures of money and setting the budget up as of January 1st?
It's been of considerable
But for 6
concern.
months ahead, you're anticipating what, the 18 months of
Yeah, it's been of considerable concern, and we did talk extensively with Norm Levesque and Bob Nelson of the city, the borough finance people, regarding it, and they felt either way would be a very difficult if you're trying to relate. We also have the problem of relating to the federal deal, which is going to change to October. So it is a mechanical problem that we're just going to have to face. And this is the way we faced it, and we think we're right as far as legality and everything.
Chairman?
Mr. Parsons.
Stan, it came up, an accountant called me too, who insists that it should be possible to make one fiscal year regardless of the school district being, make them all the same, he suggests, and that we should be able to work it out somehow. I would appreciate it if you would look at the thing and see if you can see where there can be one fiscal year and write us a note on it if you
You devote that much time to the worry of it. I don't think.
But it is.
Mr. Shy.
The thing that you have to remember is that both the state and the federal grants operate on a July 1 fiscal year. See, and it has to tie into that. Unless the state is willing to change its grants, and the federal's going October, as Frank points out, so you got real confusion on this thing. And in the transition, we looked at it and talked about it, and something's going to have to be worked out, but there is no melding of them. No.
Lisa.
Oh, I just wanted to say that with the school district fiscal year, we can't change the way that's set up because of the state law that
Yeah.
governs the school district.
Yeah, I understood
but
that.
we-
I just wanted the language clarified to say that each budget.
I understand your point. Dick?
Thoughts, Mr. Chairman, and back to my question, Stan, if you will. I don't think I still understand. You don't, your question is which fiscal year we're talking about, the school district's fiscal year or the new government's fiscal year?
I just wanted to get the phrase in there, each budget, to clarify that there are two different budgets. And the way the language appears now, it sounds as the assembly shall approve the budget as amended. So the budget is a singular word, but if you said approve each budget as amended, you would then more clearly enunciate the fact that there are two budgets, actually two budgets. I just thought it was a little sloppy language.
The actual monthly assembly, what are you saying?
You're speaking in singular when you say the budget.
I know. Give me your proposed wording, right at the end of the fiscal year?
The assembly shall
The
approve.
comments?
I guess you could get it if you just said this in the middle of that 10:05. If you said the assembly shall approve each budget or approve the school budget and the remaining borough budget as amended and appropriate necessary funds of at least 21 prior to the end of that budget's fiscal year. Then I think the language would be a little more clear. You might get into some litigation otherwise.
We certainly will address it and have Rick go over it. Review what
Now, I was in the transition area. I ran into let's take a few of these commissions. The borough has a ethics commission. We've been trying through the Citizens Council for Community Improvement. We started an action to get the city to go ahead and set up an ethics commission. We ran into I don't think some of the administrative people wanted ethics commission. And I don't think some of the councilmen wanted it. Anyway, we haven't made any progress on it. But here there is you state that these commissions shall continue. But my question is, under their interpretation here, will the Ethics Commission of the borough, in the new, since it is in existence, will in the new Anchorage municipality, will the Ethics Commission as exists in the borough cover ethics in the rest of the operations which are absorbed into the operation, but which at this present time are not subject to an Ethics Commission consideration in case the question came up about ethical importance.
specifically I can't often say, except one thing, that we do cover that all commissions, existing commissions, shall continue until they've been reviewed by the new municipal governmental body. Then most of these things would be subject to that new governmental body's
All right, but
determination.
then let us say a question comes up, the new government goes into effect, and the council or the assembly is in the process of examining it. But a question of the ethics of what was a city employee or a city officer, a city that would be an employee because there would be no more city officers in the sense of council. Some question comes up about his deportment and his ethics. Would during that interim period while the commission, while the assembly is examining, or the mayor is examining what kind of commissions he wants, would they have purview over an item of deportment of somebody, say, in the city water utility or the electric utility or a policeman who is still operating under a city?
Vic?
Well, I think I've asked the question.
Stan, it's up to the mayor, and I think it's your guess as well as ours. What we said is the mayor shall make that decision, and until such time as all these ordinances are reviewed. So I would assume that the mayor would allow the Ethics Commission to continue only in the arena that it had been in previously, until such time as all the ordinances are reviewed by the Assembly, at which time it would seem logical to me that the Assembly would adopt a uniform ordinance for both, obviously all areas. But that then becomes a new issue, in essence. Is that adequate?
No, it doesn't satisfy me.
No, but that's the way we've set it up. I don't know how else you do it. When you're in conflict, when you've got two ordinances in conflict, which is kind of the situation there, somebody's got to resolve the conflict.
Well, you could say where a commission does not exist in one body and does not exist in the other former body, the commission shall take purview over all the functions that it was given to in the whole new government.
Yep, good.
I'd like to ask Sherry.
I was just going to direct your attention to section 1605A, which is the provision that Dick was speaking about.
That's where I got my question.
Yeah, that's the one that says that the ordinances, resolutions, and regulations and orders of the former governments are preserved to have effect where they had effect before. So the borough would be under that. The city would not until the mayor made the determination, and he could make the determination, right after the new government takes effect.
He could say that
He could designate that the ordinance of the borough would be applicable to the entire new municipality until such date as the assembly brings forward a new ordinance to cover an ethics commission, establishing an ethics
in other words,
commission.
to carry it to a different commission. You got two parks and recreation commissions. Could the mayor arbitrarily, the day after he goes into existence, say that the both commissions are combined for the as an interim?
I think he could.
Yes, yes,
That's the intent.
yeah, he's the executive.
Well, I wonder if you shouldn't clarify the language in who there. I know you don't want to get too much in these, because people will nitpick these things to all pieces if you do that. But I wonder if you shouldn't have some clarification of there, what his powers are in the interim period. Bring up the language a little bit, or add a few sentences in there that would cover that.
Mr. Chairman,
Sherry?
5C. The transition area is a very complex thing. If you try to anticipate every small occurrence, we're bound to fail. So what we have to do is make broad general areas within which the new government will act and give them the flexibility to function as a new government.
Well, my final point was that I had heard that the people from Juneau, Douglas, new borough, came up and said that the only mistake they made was they speeded up the process too fast to transition. And I think you've speeded it up pretty well here. They said you ought to have about 3 years to go through a process of change. And you're going to do it, see, the election is in October.
Maybe August.
August, yeah. And then by, when does the mayor, and that you elect the mayor at the same time. And then he, by October, what day was it, October 15th, has to,
No, July.
I thought there was an October date.
Well, the October date is the date of the election.
And he,
Of the,
And he has till the
May
next July.
1976, the mayor shall submit to the assembly in the form of a proposed ordinance and administrative code containing a plan of organization for the executive branch. Now that means you're going to have to work awfully fast to combine, because there will be several combinations of staff. Look at the places where there's duplication in the city. Data processing for one. The school district has a data processing machinery and staff that's used jointly with the borough for its own data processing needs. And the city has a separate staff. In fact, we've spent an inordinate amount of money back 3 years during the last go-round on the charter. That was one of the points that was made for proposing that we have a new charter, was we could get rid of this duplication of and overlapping of staffing that they have. And let me tell you, I've had something to do with reviewing data processing proposals when I was management analyst for the FAA before I retired. And data processing is a bear. People come in with these proposals, and the staffing generally gets too great because it's hard to put them down. And it takes a lot of study to determine just what the basic staffing for a data processing organization should be. And I don't think you're giving the mayor enough time to come through with this code and this plan of organization. I think you ought to extend that out further. You have several other duplicate places that aren't quite as great as that you got them in the police, in the fire department. You've got them in the parks and recreation. You've got them in public works. Very greatly. If you have to give him more time, it's going to take him a month or more to set up a plan for analysis, which is important. The first thing he'll have to do is determine how he's going to go about it. Is he going to have task forces from a task force in each of these areas, represented by some employees from the former borough and some officers from the former city? And then is he going to have any public participation on it? Is he going to call in any outside consultants? He's got to come up first with his plan. It's going to take him 30, 60 days to get the plan underway and appoint the officers to make the studies. And believe you me, when you get representatives from the city employees and representatives from the borough departments, they're going to be empire builders. And rather than cut down duplication of staffing, they're going to be probably asking for more staffing, because it just follow the same pattern that the state and federal government follows when it sets up budgets. They're always overbuilt to begin with. So I think you should give the mayor a longer time before you make him come in with his code, instead of May 1st, 1976, you ought to extend that up into the midsummer or the 1st of September by the following 1976.
Chairman?
I think that's all the,
Dan, Ginny Klein came up from Juneau, who was active on that consolidation down there, and cautioned us not to have a shorter transition time as they had, but they had less than 6 months. They had 3 months or something. And suggested we...
for 3 years?
Well, she suggested at least 6 months, what she said, and this one is about 8 for the first deadline, and the other one is essentially 9. But you're suggesting longer.
I'm suggesting a longer period.
Mr. Chairman, we've sent a copy down to them in Juneau, and with a note requesting that they comment on the transition specifically. Have we left enough time for things? Because they've done it, and I think your point's very well taken. We want to be sure that we're not going to be so rushed that things are done too hastily.
Mr. Chairman?
Lisa?
Is this section, just the way that I read it, would say that the mayor just submits a plan on how the executive branch will be organized, not that everything has to be compiled at that time into one, into the executive branch, that all this has to be put together, but that this plan is formulated.
What was the section you got lost?
1604.
Okay. 1604, yeah. The mayor shall submit to the assembly in the form of a proposed ordinance on administrative code containing a plan of organization for the executive. The proposed ordinance shall become law 20 days after submitted unless sooner adopted with or without amendment or rejected by the assembly. If the proposal made by the mayor is rejected, he shall propose an ordinance to the assembly within 15 days of rejection. There's where I got the July 1st, 1976. If before July 1st, 1976, no such ordinance has been adopted with the assembly, the ordinance proposal submitted by the mayor shall become law. That's hurrying it up too much, I think. We've got to give it more time. We're going to have a very difficult job in appointing the people that give a fair analysis of what is needed. And give more time to
Well, as Sherry said, we've sent it down to Juneau, and we will consider the extension of time.
I just finished reading Edwin Newman's book about the misuse of the English language. This point in time, some of you have read it. So I got a criticism, a final niggardly criticism against these kind of questionnaires. Please mail and clip this form. We need your thoughts on the chart of the day. What one section concept do you most approve of? And what concept do you most disapprove? Quantitative approval. I approve of it 96 2/10%. And I disapprove of it say 18 4/10%. That's a quantitative type of thing. That's a sloppy questionnaire. We're responsible for that ought to be changed. Even if I have to point the finger to your staff.
Chairman?
Make questionnaires.
I think Lisa has a question. Lisa?
Mr. Erickson, I wanted to ask you about, on 1605D, it asked that the mayor prepare and submit a compilation of the...
direct responsibility to their department. Now, it may be to hire the manager of the department, but that was their particular area of worry. And it worked out pretty well. I don't think that Urbana was a badly run city. Olin came from Champaign. I don't know what he thought of Urbana.
Dick had a question to ask.
Yeah. Fred, your idea about appointments by the assembly instead of the mayor is very interesting. Do you think we'd end up with better people on the boards and commissions, and that would be the goal, of course?
Yeah.
You think we would, really?
I think you get more people than you could. If somebody's putting on their friends, there's at least a broader group of friends.
The only thing that would concern me is discussing this, if you will, is that the Assembly didn't take that much interest in making the appointments.
Well, I know that right now there are people coming to my wife that want to be on certain, appointed to certain things and hope that she has the input to the mayors to do it, but the mayor makes the choice. Whereas if these people still come to her, if she was having the ability to put their name on the floor at a work session where she's going to make some appointments for commission. And I think that in one way it makes the legislators are pretty frustrated. You know, they pass all these good laws, they make all these good recommendations, and the administration goes and does what it wants. And the area of bringing more people to government is through these special boards. And so to not to get it so ingrown, so one guy's appointing all his friends or people think like him, why not get more people coming in from more types of people so that you get more varied input into the advisory role, if it's going to be advisory or if it's going to be regular.
Fred had a question.
Fred, I want to ask you something. On your remarks about single-member representation, the representation goes by number count, not by area. I mean, if you're talking about Girdwood's number of people, and General Girdwood is put in with somebody else.
One district is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Where you have 3 men from a district, you have each one of those representing more people, and the people in the larger district feeling that much more withdrawn from their...
But wouldn't you have a larger assembly by doing that?
No, you could have 11 districts.
So you're not back to true representation, huh?
Huh?
You wouldn't be back to true representation if you really want to have each district representing itself.
Why not? You could proportion the borough bowl into 11 districts.
Lisa?
On the single-member districts, do you think that because there are the fears that, you know, if there's a small district, that person only represents that area and they won't look at the whole area, that maybe along with, you know, 11 single-member districts, that there should be a few people running at large?
Well, I think that...
Or does that complicate it?
I frankly, this is an answer. This has been a classic governmental type of answer to it, that you get some people that are elected at large, they have a broader view. I think it has a lot to do with the person that you elect. I think you can elect a person at large that's going to be very myopic in his view and take care of only his friends and his client constituents. And just because he's elected at large isn't going to change that man one in order. You may have a guy elected from Eagle River who does a good job of representing Eagle River people, but yet it has a broader view and is a good thinker and has a feeling for the whole community and could be a real leadership in providing types of legislation and programs that's going to benefit the whole area. I just don't feel it follows. I feel that it reflects primarily the type of people elected. If they're from a kind of an area that's going to rotten borough, never had any representation, they want their man, and they finally get him, and they own him, and boy, you shoot down everything, and you protect us from the taxes, that's the kind of representative he's going to be or won't be reelected. At least he's going to have to give them that kind of representation. But there are also other people voting that feel they belong in the community, not just election district.
Well, Lisa, did you have another question? I do want to give everybody a chance. Sure. I don't want to carry it on too long.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Fred. And if we have anybody else, I'd like to hear from anyone else here. Would you state your name? I would like to ask you to state your name so that we have it on the record.
I'm Helen. Did you want anything else to say?
No.
Okay. I probably show my ignorance, but I would like an interpretation of this word, refunding bonds. Next to the last line at the end of it, what is the meaning of refunding bonds?
bonds that are outstanding against the municipal corporation, we'll say, it could be school bonds, or it could be sewer bonds, or some other bond that are outstanding against the corporation, may, in order to reduce the payments for some reason, you may want to string out the payments a little longer rather than, so you refund them, you reissue them to a new buyer who will take a longer term, or you reissue them for the same term at a lower interest rate, or maybe for some other advantage to the community, you reissue those bonds. I can't think of another one now except extension of term in order to make the payments less onerous. Right. Did you have any other question, Mr. Starbuck?
Well, I was just going to comment that I thought this 1101 section B was worded very well. It's very clear that the most voting are the ones that voted in a certain election, or whether it's the total register, which is always when those statements are made before they're very used.
Thank you.
1101B, maybe.
No sales tax ordinance is valid until ratified by a majority of those voting on the question at a general or special election. John, would you give your name and...
7121 Chester Court. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, the only thing I want to speak to you about on the charter is something that is not included in it, whether or not it could be the attorney should probably speak to. The potentiality for saving millions of dollars for the community exists in the realm of Social Security. And I think that as we understand it, where I work, municipalities through the state of Alaska participate in a Social Security program. With a new municipality coming into being, so to speak, I would certainly recommend that the option of whether or not to be included under Social Security coverage, if it's possible and legal, be written into the charter and let the employees vote on it. I believe that it would fail. The maximum Social Security payment this year is $824 and some odd cents. That's $1,648 for, well, I would imagine certainly the vast majority of employees. My department pays in the area both of employer and employee contributions of $80,000 per year out of this community. We are well covered with our pension plan. All the city and borough employees are well covered. In 1951, when the question of Social Security was voted upon in the city of Anchorage, there was no retirement plan of any type. The only thing they had was Social Security. At that time, the annual rate was roughly $144 a year. I pay more than that per month right now myself. I think this is really worth checking into, because what I'm saying is no pie in the sky, and it's not demagoguery. I'm talking literally about millions of dollars a year out of this community, out of the pockets of the employees and out of the pockets of the taxpayers, as far as how much it costs per employee in the realm of fringe benefits. I think it really should be checked into, and if it's possible, have it in the charter that there will not be any coverage until such time as an election is held, and let the election by the employees determine whether or not they have it. That's all I have.
Fred, isn't Social Security mandatory?
Not for municipal.
I'd understood that
Is it?
government people could...
I thought that was a federal thing.
I'd understood that government people or governments could go out.
I'll have to ask the attorney. I always thought it was a mandatory thing.
No, I don't, Mr. Chairman, know for sure whether Social Security payments are optional or required or what.
No, even school district employees had the option whether to go or not.
With local government agencies throughout the United States, it's optional. Whether they come under, it's optional with the local government entity, whether it will encompass, embrace the employees. And your proposal is that the employees have that determination.
Well, even so, that would be a personnel policy that I don't think a charter can address itself to. All a charter is a constitution, and I don't know how you would, how a charter could cover that.
Fred, is sell the charter.
Yeah.
Let's face it, you guys are operating on a charter commission based on the vote of 8% of the registered voters in this area. You know that as well as I.
Yeah.
And we don't know if we're going to get much more than 16 or 17% turnout when the thing goes to vote. And I think that anything you can do that's going to take some of the burden of taxation off this community will go that much further than selling the charter. I know whereof I speak. It is an optional thing, and it costs a fortune, and it's going nowhere but up. And why I'm saying it now, if we take the charter as it is, and we adopt all ordinances and all regulations, we're going to adopt those things right in. And this is really a singular opportunity for the new municipality and its employees, should they desire to get out of that thing. And I feel very confident that by far the vast majority of the employees would vote not to be covered, because we're all covered by city or state pension plans now, which we weren't many years ago.
Mr. Sheffield?
Well, I think it's an interesting point. It's one that I'm sure that we hadn't thought of or discussed. I would think, though, that is there really a vast majority of the city employees feel that way? It might be a personal thing. They may want their own individual choices, which would probably be difficult to do. But
I can speak factually, Bill, for the Anchorage Fire Department and the Anchorage Police Department through their employee organizations are both on record as unanimously endorsing the concept of getting into Social Security. And had been active in that type of in labor work for many years prior to that, switching to the management side. And there's a very strong groundswell, and it gets stronger every year as the price goes up.
John, has that been declined by the managements of the city or the borough? Have they refused to apply for, or why hasn't it been done or considered by the existing government? Do you know?
The complications of getting out once you're in are apparently pretty awesome from a legal point of view. About 10 years ago, I did some checking and called Senator Bartlett at the time's office. And in that same afternoon, I got calls from Baltimore and Juneau, because they thought we had wanted to get in rather than get out. But it's a very complicated and cumbersome legal procedure that requires petitioning for an election, and then it takes a period of 2 years after that election to get out.
Right. Just another question for my own education, and that is, what happens to the money that's accumulated to date? Would they get that, or would they lose it?
No, you never actually lose. Many people would be fully covered for minimum benefits if they have 40 quarters, which is 10 years.
Lisa?
We've said in the transition section about the employees that the pension plans, retirement plans, and things like that they all stayed the same until the adoption of the administrative code. With the section that we've done on the employees and, what happens to the employees of the governments, do you think that we should change that in some way? Or you know, should we
that-
leave it?
The
Should we?
section that you have written now,
Yeah,
I don't like it as an employee.
yeah.
I don't
But,
like the last 4 or 5 words of that sentence.
What
and
section
in
is
the
that,
adoption of the
Lisa?
administrative
Yeah.
code?
Right.
Where's this?
Which
Um,
section?
1604B. But when you're, you know, when you're going from the two governments and that into the one, how would you set it up? Like, would you ask them if they wanted to be union or non-union, and how would you set it up when you're going from, you know, in that transition section?
It's set up all right now, except that they say for that last portion of it, which pending the
Adoption of the administrative code.
administrative rules. And now you have to realize I'm expressing purely personal opinion here. I don't care for that because you have it and you go vote for the charter, you can vote favorably, and then the guy takes it all away. Like my question to you would be, what pension plan am I going to have? The one I have now or the state? Nobody can answer that for me.
I think I hear what you're saying, that they won't be diminished until the administrative code is adopted, and the wording is such that it could be diminished.
And I know of no employee on my department who supports that. Because that last word, which is probably necessary from your point of view.
Give them an option to stop the present or change.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Fisher.
I don't know how you could eliminate it, John, with that wording. I mean, you know, if you eliminated the wording, I think you're inviting chaos, because, you know, it's a practical matter. You can't retain both of them.
No, nobody, you mean 2 retirement plans?
Well, in essence, yeah. I mean,
no.
well, but that's kind of the thing, the kind of argument you get into, I'm afraid, if you didn't have that language in there. I think the intent is pretty clear, that we mean that overall there'll be no reduction, but the things got to be brought together, and there's going to be conflict. And what looks like reduction to one person isn't going to look like reduction to another person. And what's a reduction, what isn't a reduction, is going to be an argument that go on for years and years. And I'm afraid that, wow. I mean, I don't know how. I have another question too. You see the problem.
Sure, I understand it.
And I'm sympathetic with what you're saying, but the problem is I don't know how else to do it. The other question I had is that instead of having a vote on the Social Security program, why not, can we include in here in terms of a subject that will be addressed in the adoption of the administrative code? Now that, you know, then it could be proposed in many ways, by vote, or perhaps the administration could make that decision. Now, I don't know if that's a good idea either, but writing in a specific provision like that, I don't know, I'm a little uncomfortable with it.
Well, I'll tell you why I suggested, Dick, and I'm well beyond my limited competence in this area, since it has to do with the legal profession. But I'm afraid that once the transition is made and you make the first pay period comes up and Social Security is withheld, that's it. Moot question.
Another question, you know, you can point out, it might take you 2 years to change it, but if you go through the petitioning...
Stan, I've been working on that thing for over 10 years, so we haven't got anywhere. And this is the way we see it as an opportunity.
Okay.
Because you know that if we didn't say this, then if we didn't say it, then it would be up to the legislative body as to what they would do. When we talk about the administrative code and the adoption of that, should we give the employees of the new municipality the right there to decide how they wanted to operate, and under the administrative code and rules of practice and procedure governing administrative proceedings and personnel and stuff like that, should that be written somewhere within there?
Well, I think that employees would have some input anyway, but we wouldn't want to give them carte blanche. They're right on.
Should we leave it up to the
Well, I
legislative
have a
body?
question at least in reference to what he's talking about. What is the effect of the new charter? Is that a new government?
Yes, it is.
Well, in a sense, then you won't have to rescind it because the other business corporations and these are going out of existence, and then and only if you adopt all their ordinances.
We do that somewhere here.
Well, I know you do, as it's now stated, but only if you adopt all the ordinances would you continue the Social Security. And I don't think it'd be too hard to say that the question of retirement and Social Security should be addressed only after negotiation with employees or something. In other words, you go into the new government without any retirement system, without any Social Security system.
Well, could they leave out the labor contracts too in that case?
Conceivably, then you should make a commitment to
I'm going to call on Dick, and then I'm going to ask Rick to look into.
Oh, that's what I was going to do, Mr. Chairman. In fact, if I give you some language just off the top here and see how that would work, something like Social Security enrollment shall be decided by employee vote, or it's got to be a little more elaborate than that, but something to that effect. And if you could look into that with no objection from the commission, we take a look at that when we get back in the session.
I think I see the idea is to make sure we don't inadvertently perpetuate whatever is going on now by adopting ordinances generally. Yeah, I think that's...
Well, and the other area is the question because this is going to affect your vote, the things he's talking about.
That's right.
Is whether the police and the fire department can keep their retirement program. Now, the city's operating on two different retirement programs. There's no reason that you could have to say that before any new retirement program is instituted, the employees of the prior municipal entities will have the option of continuing under their old.
I believe that is covered in here now. That is covered in
That
here
is,
now.
well, this is just part of the same. Before we get under Social Security again, we have to have at least negotiations or something. I think that same kind of a caveat could be put in there.
Did you have anything else?
No, just again reminded of what my old English mother used to tell me, the well said words of tongue and pen, the saddest of these of my pen. And really,
Thank you for coming, Stan.
I think we're talking about millions of dollars, and I think we could save it and keep it within the community.
Right. Was there anyone else who had a question or would like to address the commission this time? Or any comments upon the charter as prepared and presented to you through the paper? Yes, ma'am.
Deborah Bickford. I concur with the Mr. Sophick's philosophies. Majority of them I feel that not really knowing how commissions are comprised, I feel that this is a very important point to be brought up, because I feel that it's important that commissions are comprised of people who are experts in what they do. There are some commissions
in the world that have representation on them that have no knowledge of what they are hearing. If they were as to the industry, perhaps the industry could be brought in as representatives. The people in the industry or whatever they're governing know more of what is happening and the intricacies in something else entirely. I also feel that what he said about a representation, one representative for a district is very important. My feeling on it is just personal as a voter. I think that he touched upon the essence of it. If you have one person to talk to, you have more chance to know that person and his philosophies, also and vice versa, than you would several. Because it is true that you may have a chance to have more, the odds would be better that you would have somebody who you agreed with. However, if you would still, I feel, have better representation from one person that is striving to do success than 3 or 4 people or whatever for a vast number, because, like he says, you feel further away from participating in the government. I feel that this is brought up a very good point.
Can I ask a question?
Ms. Parker?
Either Mr. Selkirk or I can't remember your name. There's been argument about the fact that if you have small districts and you have 2 qualified people in the district that, want to run, that one person gets shut out. Can I have your feelings on that?
Well, I don't feel that we have that breadth of quality in this community. I always think that there is hundreds of people that would be well qualified. The trouble is that they are not willing. And having presented myself for political office several times, it's kind of a rough game. I don't blame her. My wife is now Assemblyman. Man, you're really working her. Maybe she's really working herself, but you're getting your much work. Well, I mean, just for the time, I kiddingly say I don't have a wife anymore. She's either not home or she's home on the telephone.
Ms. Dixon?
I don't know whether this applies to really the charter, but perhaps somebody might be able to answer it. Is there any way that the government, and that's what this charter is about, can be limited to population as far as expansion of the government offices, people?
Numbers of employees, are you talking about? I don't know how you would do that, except by electing people who refuse to appropriate money to perform the things that citizens seem to ask or appear to be asking. It's pretty difficult to limit the size of John's department or the police department or parks and recreation, because you've got a body of people in each case who say, I don't care what you do about all these other things, but that you don't cut out. And,
Well, I think in in that respect, cutting out, but as far as, it appears that the government grows regardless of what the population is, whether it is decreased or it doesn't grow in proportion. Isn't there someone, some analyst or whatever that could figure, it must have a certain ratio?
We've met the enemy and he is us.
Well, I think that's probably part of the unification idea is that, government is expensive and we know that, and so one government ought to be cheaper than two, or minimize the swindle by only having one instead of two or something like that.
Mr. Southgate?
Well, Stan touched on this audit and review. I really feel that, reflecting her sentiments, that there should be techniques to ride herd on these administrators that continue to pad their budgets and build empires by hiring employees to divide up work. Somebody said that the government is nothing but a genteel form of relief by way of transfer payments because and I couldn't really disagree with this to our people want to work for government. I think that a lot of the government does could be done with a lot fewer people, but the political realities of how to sweat that extra fat out of the operation is a real rough one. But it would seem to me that's one of the reasons I'm opting for the manager. I feel what we're seeing in the borough is where you have two departments going in before the assembly and having different recommendations and arguing the policy before the assembly. I mean, it's unheard of. As a manager, my God, I think he would settle that in his office before he let him go before the assembly. It's just running themselves. It's nobody's running it. That's what's going on. That sort of thing's transpiring. But that happens. The Parks Department will come in and you'll have the public work that have to disagree with them, or the planning department will contradict the Parks Department, or the engineer, environmental police will disagree with something. This indicates to me that somebody's not butting heads and making policy for the borough before they get before the assembly.
Well, I think that is a reflection of the assembly allowing the leadership to do
Well, then
that.
have the leadership. People elect the leadership when you elect a mayor. How can you do about it? You can say, okay, we'll give you less money for this department. Well, he can hire a few of the people he'd like to see stay there and keep his friends who'll keep saying yes to him and ripping you off.
But isn't it good to have conflict?
No, conflict is the right point.
Mr. Franklin?
Well, I suppose I'm entitled to my philosophy too then. And I've been a public employee for many years, and I recognize that public employees are fair game and always will be. And we talk of empire building. It's been my experience that departments and so forth take to do that job in a week or two. But as demand for services are placed, you have to have more and more people to meet these demands. And this is what government knows. It seems to me not so much empire building or power base, although that's certainly done too.
Chairman. Mr. Sheffield?
Well, I was going to say, we talked about this last week at the State Chamber Board meeting. I think until we, the people, are willing to sacrifice certain things, government is always going to cost more and more and more. And as you look around the room here and you look around the state, and you ask this person, well, do you want to do away with your bridge, or how about your road, or your school? And nobody's going to say no. And so things just keep escalating, and until such time as we really decide that we don't mind waiting that month to get those chuck rolls, or if you want the next big ladder truck, you know, that's good, and who wants to wait for that?
Well, I feel that I hear a lot of what goes on now in terms of Assembly B, and my wife's an Assemblywoman. In terms of what just transpired, in terms of having to adopt the school budget, I would like to see a line item. My wife would like to see a line item, you know, but that, as you say, can't be done. But one of the things that you are doing is you have this Citizens Review Committee, which my daughter served on, and they did a lot of work. Now, they didn't have enough time to get over the whole thing, but it came out that who does that committee belong to? Is that the borough's committee, or is that the school board's committee? And who's listening to who? Apparently it was a committee created by the Borough Assembly, which goes through and does a lot of line item analysis and analyzing and comes up with some round figures of what they can cut. But there's no guarantee that that's the way the school board is going to handle that cut. So I think that though the technique of this reviewing or auditing in terms of your budget and the what went transpired by some sort of a citizens committee to make or even maybe an objective auditor. But I think citizens are good because they talk to the neighbors and everybody gets excited. If it's really smelly, they don't bury it. It gets out in the public and gets aired. So a group of people that come in and audit different kinds of programs after, or the budgets when they're being prepared, which would give Assembly, which were very busy people, usually holding down other jobs, some citizen input and some thoughts about where logical cuts and where the tightening up could come about.
Did you have another question?
Yeah. On this duplication of services like sewage and parks and fire departments, when the unified government comes in, there will be two separate groups running the same thing. Well, what's going to happen to all the people that work for that department? I realize that there will be some conflict, there will be some duplication, but there shouldn't be. Well, what I got out of this was that nobody's going to be losing their job. But yet you don't need two separate groups in the top positions on those. Like parks, for instance. There should be only one group of people running the whole damn park system if there's going to be a unified government. And yet you have two groups of people that are going to be trying to run.
Mr. Parsons?
The statistics seem to indicate that there's about a 12% turnover over a rather short period of time in the borough, and the city figures aren't too different, and that by attrition the problem will even itself out.
In the top levels?
Mr. Chairman.
I don't know.
No, I think there's a misunderstanding about that, sir. The charter calls for all positions remaining the same until the adoption of the personnel code, and at which time those pull together. But you can't have them disappear the day of the election.
I don't mean for them to disappear on the day of the election.
Right.
What I mean is, so let's take parks, for instance. You have the city-run parks and borough-run parks. Okay. Now, what about the, say, the top 10 or 20% of the personnel in those two departments?
They'll be combined by I think it's July 1 of the following year.
I don't really see it as a big problem. I was apprehensive to start with, but I remember when our park budget for the city was about $80,000 for a year, and as we've grown, the number of them, and that Alice Moffett then shared an office with the fire department down in the original city hall, and half of a secretary as the head of a department. And just the workload as the city grows, and we know it is going to be such that we're not going to have fewer employees under any stretch of the imagination, but will increase slower, perhaps. I don't really see it as a problem of absorbing them as much as I do just placing them at the right place.
Mr. Chai? I think to directly answer your question, on your top positions, when they combine, some of them will disappear.
What happens to the people that are in those positions now, the ones that lose their jobs?
They are,
Are they going to be
No.
transferred to another
No,
department or another position, or just going to be out of a job completely?
former may be terminated only for cause, pension plan, am I in the right?
Pending personnel.
Pending personnel, pending adoption by the Assembly of a comprehensive personnel classification and procedures ordinance. Mrs. Holmes?
Mr. Chairman, I know in the borough that your department heads are not covered by the merit system, and so they can be terminated for reasons other than cause. All other employees are covered by a merit system, and I believe that pending the adoption of the personnel rules, that merit system would continue to apply, and then they would come under the new merit system, and so I think you would have lateral transfers to other comparable positions, and you'd lose people because they left the job, they left the state, whatever. And I think that's the way it would be taken care of.
I think you could write a sentence in there, John Franklin gets to keep his job.
You want that in the sub-transition bar?
That's one of the reasons I'm glad I'm not a top law. You do a pretty good job.
Chairman?
Mr. Parsons?
Mr. Franklin, do you have any thoughts on whether you prefer the strong mayor with assemblymen or the council manager form of government?
John Asplin used to say whatever the people want.
Good answer.
Three particular choices, that one got the most votes, although not the majority.
Can I ask Mr. Franklin a question?
Yeah. You could live with both.
Yeah.
Either.
Hey, there's another question. Somewhere in here I read something about no runoff election.
No what?
No runoff election. What happens if nobody gets none of the candidates get a majority of the vote?
Plurality.
One who gets the most votes wins?
Right.
That's not a violation of the municipal code, the state. They changed it, this legislature.
Ms. Parker?
I had a question for Mr. Franklin. Gene Bennett talked to us at our last public hearings, and he talked about if we went with a strong mayor form of government, that possibly there should be a fire commission established to run the fire department. And, I don't know, the paramedics would be into that or what. Can you get your feeling on that?
I put the chief ran fire. I don't see the need for another level of, of course, we may need it to save a lot of our jobs. Actually, I can't personally see that it's really a matter of
Yeah.
Are the police and fire departments separate from political harassment and re-election type of thing? So, I mean, would the fire chief or police chief be changed when they get a new mayor?
Could. Oh, yeah.
Any department.
Yeah, any department head could be.
All department heads serve at the pleasure of the mayor, with the exception of the attorney and the city at present. And we have it so that there can be an attorney for the municipal government, but that the legislative branch can have its own if it so desires. But with that, with those few minor exceptions, the mayor is the chief.
Yes, you have a question?
I guess I'm getting tired of being just in Bangladesh because I'm reporting on this stuff and I'm not supposed to take a position. So all I can say is those of you who disagree with what I say, please lambaste me if I show any partiality in my reporting. But just as an Anchorage resident, I do personally favor multi-member districts. And I feel strong. In fact, I don't prefer no districts whatsoever. I'd like everything to be a line for me, let me get that. And my primary reasoning, I can tie back to something like the Seward Highway zoning, strict commercial zoning along New Seward Highway a couple of years ago. That affects me a lot as a resident of Anchorage. And yet, under single members, I don't have a chance to vote, perhaps, but for one of the people who voted on that issue. In other words, I could live clear out in Muldoon, clear out here, I don't. And yet I feel very strongly about what happens to the New Seward Highway. That's just basically my all you that are in favor of the districts.
Can I ask? How do you feel about a council manager versus a strong mayor?
Probably not strongly either way.
That's what we keep getting as an answer.
Either way.
Probably not strong either way. The city works really well. It's a sort of form of government. They've been in meetings for a long time. I don't know. I just do feel strongly about the district. I've been unhappy with the legislature
Sir, did you have any questions?
No.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions?
78 degrees in your home.
Yeah. There are no other questions. We will adjourn. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you have signed in on the roster so we know who was here. Appreciate it. 7.
No. Thank you. Okay. Does Mayor Robert, do you know everyone? Yes, I do. And Terry's introduced everyone? Okay. Uh-oh, we've had it. Why don't we just start by asking you what things you've seen that you either did especially like or saw some problems with?
Have you had a chance to look at
If you both got copies, why don't we hand them copies so they can speak to it?
We had copies.
You got them with you? Okay.
Well, fine, Madam Chairman. I really appreciate coming here. I might start by saying I have not attended your meeting somewhat purposely. I felt that you ought to make your initial decision not being influenced by incumbents, and then do just what you're doing now, asking us to come and make comments. As I've said in my written material to you, I think it's an excellent charter. In general, it's ideal from my standpoint. As an ex-political scientist and as a practicing official, strong executive type of government is the best thing. And I say that with Anchorage in mind. I think we're at the size of 175 going on 200,000.
Quickly.
And we're a very responsive community, thankfully, and we need political leaders who are there to respond to it. And I think the system of separation of authority between the legislative branch and the executive branch is a good system. I've worked very hard to divide those two to the point of being accused of forcing an adversary system onto the borough, but I don't think I've overdone it. I think I've hopefully done it just enough, and now we've got a good assembly. I say that with full knowledge that the reason we have a good assembly is we no longer have institutional representation. And that was a major problem. And now I think our relationship between the executive and the legislative branch will start to work the way it's always supposed to start to work. And I think it's starting to work now. It hasn't up until this time because there's been too much political flack going around between the two institutions, of course.
Can we interrupt as you go?
Sure.
Do you think this is a result of just getting broken into getting used to the system, Jack, or do you think it's personalities or a combination?
From my standpoint?
Yeah.
No, I was raised on the city manager form of government. I was taught at college that that was the ideal form, and theoretically, I believe it is. It's a good system. You know, you get a good professional manager, and he runs your business, and he runs your government, which is a business, and the policy decisions are left up to the elected. Fine. In a city manager form, of course, it's a legislative group that makes the policy decisions, and the manager carries it out. And if they don't like him, after a while, they get rid of him. They get another manager to manage your business. And the strong executive types, of course, they can't fire the guy. He's responsive to the public, as is the legislative body. So if you had come out with a city manager form of government, I would not have fought the charter. Let me put it that way. I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad you came out with
It's a very close issue, Jack, and it's one that, to be very frank, could go the other way. It was a 6-5 vote on the commission, and
it could change.
it could change.
Frankly,
Yes, Frank Smith.
Do you know Mr. Donahue? Terry Donahue?
Donahue, Frank Reed.
Frank is, of course, our chairman.
He always speaks Japanese at this point.
Just back from 3 weeks in Japan.
No,
You must be Japanese. Wow. Impressed.
Well, if the issue is still before you, I would make a stronger pitch then. I think Anchorage is the ideal situation for a vision of elected responsibility. In other words, I think the city has operated very well under the city manager form of government, but it has been a small community up until recently. You've had businesses to run, utilities, and only utilities. I mean, of course, they went through a phase 2 of health and social services and planning and zoning and all these things that we now operate on an area-wide basis. But now we're no longer a small community. We're a large community, and whereas it used to be downtown, you knew everybody, and you knew that Frank Reed was on the council, and everyone knew the manager and the mayor. That's no longer going to be true. It's too bad, but it's just no longer going to be true. And I think the conflict, and there's inevitable conflict in government, the conflict should be between the elected executive and the legislature. It's true in Juneau. From the federal government.
Jack, what about the conflict that you get, though, not just between the executive, but conflict between the executive staff and the legislative body? We've, in the charter, written in a provision that says that the legislature may hire their own staff when they deem it necessary, just for those instances in which the legislature perhaps has a different viewpoint from the executive's viewpoint and wants their own input. But
A lot of different attorney to tell them.
But on a day-to-day basis, the legislative body has to function with the staff. Do you see as we grow that can work smoothly, or do you see a conflict?
No, I see inevitably, and I base this on 50 counties that have the executive type government. The legislative body will have a staff of its own, and I see no problem with that. Hopefully it will be a minimal staff. Right now it does, it has 7, counting the 2 ombudsmen and the 5
And the clerk.
clerk's office. So it
There's
has 7. Pardon?
Two offices?
So you'll see King County with John Spellman as the executive officer. He has a staff, and of course the legislative body has a staff. And I should have brought the whole breakdown nationally on these things.
There seem to be a size of a city that gets into one over the other, that you pass the point of the manager council form?
About 200,000. is nationally what's showing up.
That they tend then to go to the elected.
Zach, may I ask, what do you think, now, when you're talking about an elected executive, are you talking about an elected executive who must have an administrative man in his employ, or are you talking about an elected executive who professes to be the executive?
I know from first-hand experience now, and I knew going in, that you have to have a professional alongside. And so what...
Shouldn't that be written so that the guy that doesn't have the experience and walks into it blind doesn't have to fumble around to find it out?
I think you've done it in this charter. You've gotten the best of two worlds, and that's why I compliment you. I think it's really well done. You've given the ultimate authority to the mayor and to the assembly, the elected people, whereas it's rightly put, the only place you can put it. But you call for a professional. And it's absolutely essential there be a professional. Dr. Donahue and Doug Wyford are both absolute professionals.
Do you have any objection to, I think we have a provision in that it's approved, that the manager is approved by the assembly. That is confirmed by the assembly, yeah.
I don't think I may have noted that. I didn't make a big point of it. Well, it's maybe during...
But fired guy...
The only hired and fired the mayor. But it did
Really much as the...
come around to needed approval, sort of like the commission members.
Heads of department.
Heads of departments
as well.
Well, I think it probably is not particularly wise, and maybe I'm overstepping here a little bit. In other words, the state statute says chief of police, clerk, treasurer, and what's the fourth one?
Attorney?
Attorney, right. The legislative body has the right to hire or confirm those, right? They
It's
can
not
either hire
it's not hire, it's only confirm, I believe.
No, I think you can hire an attorney.
Yeah, I
The
think
attorney, you could hire the attorney for the borough, and I could be precluded from doing so. And I would...
Not interested in it, thank you.
Well, I had to fight it twice, because I think it's very important that the executive have that person. Now, if that person doesn't respond to the legislature, I say he's not doing his job. And I happen to think I've got an excellent lawyer that understands it. I would say that the executive probably ought to have the right, let's see, I really haven't thought about this. The confirmation of the assembly of the manager.
I just came up at the time the chief administrative officer came up, and Bob Breeze gave the opinion, legal opinion, that it was not in conformance with statute 29, but I would think it's, when one looks at it on a national scene, all cabinet officers are confirmed by the legislature. When one looks at it at the state level, it's true. I don't think anyone did enjoy the confidence of the assembly couldn't work with them.
I think that's a good point.
I don't have any big strong
Would it be fair to ask a question of kind of put you on the spot, the two of you? Do you think in the council manager, the same as the strong executive form, that the same kind of people would qualify for the manager's job? Is there any difference? And I think that's perhaps a fair question to ask you, Harry, that you're a professional, trained administrator. Do you have any qualms, say, as to one form or the other in applying for a job? Is there a difference in the jobs you would apply for?
I suppose I have stronger views than the mayor does, and I think the city manager form, as this day has passed, I think it's a reflection of the technocracy of the early 20th century. And that as we approach the 21st century, people are interested in more conflict in government. And the strong executive provides for shared powers to a much larger extent than does a city manager form, who can be hired and fired at will by the legislative body. And having served in elected office and served in appointed office in local government, I just have and teaching in public administration and political science, I believe that people are better served where you have shared powers. It's so much more inefficient if one wants to look at it that way. On the surface, it's a very bungling form of government. It doesn't operate with machine-like precision. But I think the spotlight is placed on the issues better, and the people have a built-in governor against precipitous actions that impose controls over them. And I believe the strong executive is a better form of government in the latter half of the 20th century. They're looking for more freedom as the complexity of government grows. And I suppose I lean very strongly towards a strong executive. But I would think that it's a matter of the individual. I think that there are, in both cases, the city manager has to learn how to operate with a council, and his problem is a little different. I have to operate with the mayor, and my job is to achieve a degree of rapport with him, whereas the city manager's is to achieve a degree of rapport with a whole group of people.
But do people tend to go from one to the other? I mean, you might, at some point in your life, go to a council manager form. I mean, do people that are administrators tend to go just to one form or into both?
I really don't have the background. I really don't know. I think there aren't that many strong executive forms of government in the It's rather new in the last 15 years. It's growing the fastest. But those who are in the CAO and the county manager jobs in the main are former city managers.
There are about 55 to 60 now, and county executives have just really come into existence in the last 5 to 10 years, and they're growing in number.
Is there some feeling that that we got from one of the gentlemen that talked to us, what was his name?
He was with
that organization?
the National League of Managers or something.
League of Cities or League of Managers. Yeah, that was here.
We had lunch with him monthly.
Yeah, right. He told us that he felt that the city manager form was a little more apropos, where you weren't having fast changes in the community, and where the majority of the community were happy with status quo sort of thing. Everybody was agreed on what was wanted, whereas the strong executive tended to go where there was a very wide divergence of what was right and what was wrong and what would be best for the community and what wasn't, because it would allow the divergent opinions to come to the fore and some sort of accommodation to be gained. Do you have that sort of a feeling?
I think that's true.
Yeah, he felt that a stable board of directors for city manager kind of thing, and that where there is this maximum growth. And of course, I've grown up essentially here with the city manager and would tend to stay that way. But I think, as has been pointed out here, that we're seeing a shift in our community style and probably need to shift our government to go with it.
Jack, we had some testimony, I believe it was some written testimony from Gary Thurlow concerning the veto power of the mayor. And I believe he suggested that vetoing emergency ordinances ought to be, we haven't written it this way, but we ought to allow 36 hours for the mayor to veto an emergency ordinance. Is that
Well, yes, that makes sense, because otherwise the mayor would have to be at every meeting, you see. If the way you have it written, he has to veto it at that meeting.
Couldn't go to Japan.
Oh.
Sure, couldn't go to Japan.
We might point out the reason we did that an emergency ordinance takes 3/4 vote, and that would be the automatic amount to
Override a veto.
override. Now, if we say gave that within 3 days, do you feel that that would be important for the fact that it would make that assembly take another look at it? Is that?
That's really, in my 3 years now, using the veto power.
Thank God you did.
Well, I've used it maybe 15 times in 3 years. John used it 15 times in 9 years. And it wasn't because I wanted to, but it is a slowing down process. And that's really the best you can say for it now. I mean, assuming that the legislative body knows what they're doing, and you've got to make that assumption. It just gives them pause. It gives them another look at things. And in an emergency, I've written in my written text here that, as a practical matter, an emergency ordinance passed by 3/4 of the Assembly will have an immediate impact, since it is pretty obvious that the chances of any veto being overridden are very good. If everybody 3 days later decides that they did the right thing, or 2 days, or whatever it is, they'll do it right. They'll go right over the veto. But it does, practically speaking, give a lot of people who have to make those decisions at a moment's notice, quickly, they kind of would like another look. And that's sometimes you make a veto just to give people
Sometimes
a
it's
chance.
desirable, too. Something may come out after the meeting that was never mentioned in that meeting.
Sure. Jack, I'd like a comment, if you might, on or Harry, on the planning section. I know how strongly you feel about planning. I had appeared on behalf of the commission at the previous charter and have been, I'm sure, influential in getting quite a bit of information in on the planning section. That's page 13. And planning was one of the first things that the charter looked at, and we were all at that particular point determined that we would be brief, succinct, and to the point. I'm a little bit nervous that we're too brief and we're too succinct. And I'd like to have some comment. We're really leaving up to the legislative body to put the flesh on this, and that is one of the powers that the Home Rule City has almost, has the total power. We're no longer guided by state statute in that case. And I just wonder how you feel about it. I'm frankly a little nervous myself.
Well, if you're nervous, then I should be nervous.
Well, I don't know.
Well, I haven't really thought much about it. Maybe Harry has a comment, but I can't add very much. I can see your concern that we did have some laws to guide us, and now we're just kicking off into the blue with just this one sentence here. Yeah, thoughts, Harry?
I do. I echo the mayor's comments on the charter itself. I think it's superb, very well done. If it has an error, it's still too long. And I think anything more you add to it will weaken it. And I think you can go back and make this document 200 pages. I think this has the beauty of saying just enough and being flexible enough to have those who are going to work with it fill it up. I think to add to it, however.
Just our cat over there.
I like that.
You like that? Was it worth it, Rick?
Oh, in many, many ways. There may be some legal reason to flesh this out. I don't know.
There wouldn't be, other than...
We had some reasoning for cutting out some of the excess verbiage, such as there were references to zoning. And we have found that zoning may not be a tool that's used in the next few years, and so to put a specific reference to a zoning plan might be outdated. The planning commission is just one sentence. The assembly will do it by ordinance and fill it out. And if there's any place maybe that needs to be embellished, it might be there, but I don't see what you would do except limit the power of the assembly.
One looks at the Constitution, the same thing is true. There will be one court and such other courts as the Congress may direct, whatever the precise words are. Same with most of the stuff. There's not a word, for example, in the Constitution that there is such a thing as executive branch.
We very hard looked at each section as we wrote it and tried to see whether it would allow the flexibility that we thought might be needed and yet give the direction that there was to be something. That was our intent, I think, in most of these sections. As to whether we have succeeded or not, we aren't quite sure.
We have in the education section not rocked too many boats. One boat that we did rock in the transition on education was to require a rerunning of all of the candidates, or all of the school board members. We've had some testimony on that already, that people feel that might not be necessary. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Well, yes, I think, the simpler you make this, the better. If you don't have to have those people run again, I think it would simplify it, because really you're rewriting a local government charter. You're really presumably not trying to restructure the educational system. And
yeah, but the Times may have been right on that point, and I don't object to us.
I think we're making an issue where none should exist, frankly.
Yeah.
They're due to have two come up in the fall anyhow, I believe. And
They were elected at large anyway.
And it's only two of them, I guess it was, that were elected in the last election where Eagle River was out, so I don't think it's any great
Besides, if we're arguing that the things done in the last election without Eagle River are valid as pertains to us,
Why aren't they valid as pertains to the school
argue
board?
that it's valid as pertains to the school board.
We, just for your information, the Charter Production Committee met with the group that's called People for Better Education, and they started out with the Ocean View group, the May Royce Hall book bit, to, I think, a more responsible but somewhat conservative group. And they are looking into, and I think they're doing it unilaterally, which perhaps is too bad, the possibility of advisory school boards, some keeping major control but decentralization. And they met with this concern that the charter would, be flexible enough to allow this kind of a thing. And really, we are not changing the structure, and as long there's an indication it would not be against state law, they would still have the rights to proceed. And they seem to be supportive of the education section as we have. They do object, however, to this question of electing all the school board members. So.
We have written in this 4 times a year meeting with the assembly. Now, I suppose they could pro forma go through it and do it, It's been my observation, at least, that the school board and assembly do not really communicate comfortably on enough occasions, for whatever reason. And I don't know if mandating it 4 times a year is going to solve it or not, but I would hope that there would be better communication between.
What do you think about that?
Well, it's a question, again, of where does the ultimate power lie, and the power, of course, on the dollar lies with the assembly, and I would not expect it to be a very happy relationship. It's the big brother, little brother relationship, and the big brother has the final say on how much money is to be spent. And that's a tough position to put elected people in, That school board sits there, and they're told what they can spend.
But would sitting together help make that worse or better?
The amazing thing, Arliss, is that individually, quite a large number of the school board members have good relationships with individual assembly members. It seems to be in mass that we are uncomfortable together.
We'll put you together in mass 4 times a year.
That's good exercise.
Pretty much the same as telling the mayor, he has to attend assembly meetings. And I think they're either going to meet on their own and come to an accommodation that they both have to live with each other. In the same way with the mayor has some powers and the assembly has the ultimate power of the budget and in effect,
Well,
decrease departments.
I don't think we specifically addressed the point of, yeah, we did it, I don't know where it is, of the school budget not being line item.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, legal. Do you think that having it in the charter will aid in this meeting situation where they know where they stand? There have been attempts from time to time of the assembly to line item veto, and that's always been fought by the school board. If it's right in the charter and says so, then you won't have that question. The question will be only on the total budget. Of course, the school board can go back and cut out the kindergarten and cut out everything that the assembly members would like to see stay in and leave something they care. But that shouldn't pose any problem as to, I should think it would, that set, when they get together, they would be better able to sit together knowing just where they stand.
Without the threat of the line item.
Without the threat of the line item, when it's clearly stated.
I don't know that we state it, but we, by silence, I believe, we do not give that authority to them.
No, I think we stated.
Do we state it?
Yeah.
Shall be passed only as a total amount.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought I remembered that, and I couldn't find it. I was looking for it.
Assembly action on the budget. The school district budget may be increased or decreased only as to total amount on page 16. Moving on into finance, I've had some comments from people concerning lease purchase. I had it right here just a moment ago.
Oh, 1009?
Yes. In particular, my neighbor Bob Flint is quite upset at the thought that a lease purchase agreement would have to go to the voters. The idea being that it raises the cost of government.
It's in the finance somewhere.
Give us the number.
1009B.
Thank you.
This is a bond. Bob, speaking as a bond attorney, probably.
Oh, speaking with many hats.
With several hats, I think.
He generally feels, I think, that when you have to go to the voters for a lease purchase, that you discourage the use of lease purchase and move the government into using just straight lease without a lease purchase agreement in there. And so you wind up paying money without any return ever, because it doesn't say that a lease has to go before the voters, just a lease purchase agreement.
But frankly, there was a reaction, I think, to the borough building, which is a very major facility that never went to the voters, and there was also, of course, a prohibition in the previous charter as to this.
Harry, you look like you have some.
Well, I had it underlined, as a matter of fact. I think that $1 million gives an awful lot of flexibility. And my idea was a little too high.
Well,
I believe there should be some flexibility over what we have now. My understanding is that this gray area in the borough, at least, is whether or not it can be done. I think, for example, in space for the borough, we've missed a lot of bets by not going the lease purchase on certain.
And just gone straight lease, you mean?
And gone straight lease. And I think that this is a little high.
You mean it should be kept, maybe $500,000?
Something that's right now, I mean, it's almost nothing. And I see nothing wrong with when you're talking about large amounts of money. There are areas of circumvention that you can do. If you can't get it on a bond issue, go lease purchase and accomplish the same thing. And I think it allows room, a little too much room for maneuvering if you make it too high.
Yeah,
And yet it does give flexibility to go up to a certain point to do something.
I think Bob's suggestion was that instead of speaking to it this way, you just require that leases or lease purchase for capital improvements be done by ordinance, with the idea that if the voters are unhappy, they bring a referendum to get around it, which of course gives total flexibility to the government to circumvent the bond.
I like your suggestion.
We also had a year provision in at one point in the draft saying, anything for longer than 3 years or more than $500,000. We took the number of years out because we felt that was too restrictive.
This type of thing, but both of them are, I think, very sound and really they made me feel really good.
I've had comment this morning already from someone who is an accountant who's uncomfortable with the split fiscal years between the school district and the borough, and that everybody should be on a June 30 fiscal year.
Of course, they feel very strongly otherwise.
I pointed this out, and we just met with them yesterday.
Right.
I have some specific comments other than the mayor when the time is appropriate.
Well, I was just sort of going through the document. We've come up to borrowing and utilities. If you have any, we've had some comment about a utility managing commission to manage the utilities.
Yes, Norm spoke to me this morning on that. I'd never thought of it. And really talking off the top of my head. As he proposed it, it was a sort of a planning commission, advisory kind of commission to the administration and to the assembly. Is that right?
Well, there are two kinds, are we?
Yeah, just very briefly, John Spencer from the city, we had an interesting meeting there. Mr. Wyford and Jack Harris were on hand, and I think John is, and along with Jack Harris, are both proponents of more almost thinking in terms of a port authority, very strong, having ability to be able to enter into bids and contracts and so on, where they're almost a supra agency. And apparently Tacoma, some places operating municipal utilities use this approach. For instance, they're having a real problem in the city now. Their pay grade is somewhere in the neighborhood of $35,000 to $40,000 that they could get a manager for the telephone utility. They feel that it's the size of a system that they need a $60,000 a year private industry type to do the job. Now, Norm's opinion was more, I believe, that we should provide for a commission that, along the line of the Planning Commission, more advisory, but to have other functions too, that it could take power, I think, from the legislative body. But I don't think he sees it as Spencer does, of a very kind of autonomous, almost autonomous board. Is that fair, do you think?
Good description of the two ideas.
Yeah, I don't think we're the size. And again, we haven't been operating the utilities, and they are sizable. They're sizable businesses.
They're complicated unto themselves, you know.
But I don't think we're the size community yet, even if we're 250, 300,000, that we need to talk about separate authorities. That connotes possibly bond, separate management. And I don't feel that if we merge these two governments that we can't handle what when we merge these two governments, that we can't handle the existing structure with some professionals like Jack Harris and running their operation. I wouldn't want to see a separate authority taking power away from the legislative body to run
utility. Well, you're putting, from my standpoint, I think, you're putting a legislative body in the position of being a telephone utility board, electrical utility board, and maybe a water utility board, and so forth, down the line through your various services. I think you begin to get away from the legislative function of being a policy-making body. You get them into long night sessions and so forth because they are passing on $25,000 or larger contracts and stuff that really, and on bond issues, revenue bond issues, for instance, that basically won't sell unless the utility is able to do it, and which to a certain extent shouldn't even worry the legislature.
All of which is,
this is my feeling that you're taking the legislature and making an operating body out of an administrative body rather than a legislative body. I think
that's the very thing you want them to be. What policy is left if they have no control over where water goes, sewer, all these various things that set the whole tone of the community for decades to come are controlled by forces which are beyond their control. This is the real
no. If those forces are directly responsible to the legislative, but the details of the administrative headings of it,
I think he's saying that the legislature should have the policy-making decision as to where the line should go and whether there will be an extension and whether the revenue bonds will be sold on this ballot or the next one, or whether it has to go to ballot even. And I think we've got it so that revenue bonds don't have to go to ballot. So what he's saying that today, well, do you have to buy this $100,000 transformer and which one do we get it from, sort of thing, is left with this commission.
Is not the legislative body's function.
Well, of course, it happens. I'm trying to get clear here. It does happen in the city still. They do still have to go to the council. Now, they don't in the borough. When the assembly sets the budgets, and then our departments, in the administration, we spend the money according to what we said we would do.
But the contracts are approved by the assembly, but they decide what sort of equipment they want. And
is there somewhere in between where the legislative body could delegate some of the powers? Because if you get the council agendas, there's an inordinate amount of those that are on Stromberg, Carlson, $25,000 contract. They can get non-professionals hung up in say 2 bids and a problem of equipment. They're not able to understand the technicalities of running that.
But there are possibilities to avoid that. For example, this borough is at the stage now and new government would be at the stage in the future of deciding whether or not they wanted a full-time legislative body, and they can set a day aside to just those issues. You can see on the other side of the coin, those who have read the book on Robert Moses, what enormous power comes into being when you have these types of power. The Port of New York, for example, has enormous power, and you see all sorts of distortions of the political process when this occurs. I mean, I think these are the Washington Suburban and Sanitary Commission in the D.C. area has enormous power that makes actions of the local governments almost meaningless. They control growth. They control what's going to happen. And the legislative bodies are sort of left to pick up the pieces after that's all over. And I think the better solution would be to make the legislative body full-time as well so they could take on these. I don't think there's anything esoteric about these utilities and a good sound professional manager and a a legal staff that has the special capabilities and
Well, then how would you keep the legislative body from having to pass on every call it two-bit item? If you're talking about a many million-dollar operation and you're bringing into them a routine, absolutely routine bid that General Electric and Westinghouse have bid, and Westinghouse is $100 cheaper, and
we do that with the assemblies right now on the council. We go out to bid on anything over $2,500 anyhow. If we're going to have a telescoping ladder, where you may recall, but this becomes an item of debate, and I think that it's no different for utilities. If you want to set the threshold higher, it will eliminate quite a bit of them. But as this is true for all governmental business, and I don't think we should make the threshold 200,000 or $1 million at the utility level and make it 2,500 at any other level.
I think I understand. I know where Frank's coming from. 25, 30 years of watching the city operate, where they're still going in for every nut and bolt, and the guys that have to pass on everybody's travel and all this stuff.
it's not.
An agenda this long.
We've gotten away from that to some extent in the borough. We don't. They pass our department budgets, and then all year long, I approve the travel, but it doesn't have to go back to the assembly. So we've gotten away somewhat from it. But to answer your question, we have a planning commission, as you know, and they handle all the planning and zoning matters. And the assembly devotes about 2/3 of their time, I would say, to appeals from the Planning and Zoning Commission. Now in King County, they've come up with a system where they have a hired professional who handles all planning and zoning matters. And it can be one man or it can be three, a commission or what have you. And a lot of counties are going to this. And they hear these cases.
An appeal officer?
Yes.
Like a hearing officer.
A hearing officer. He hears all the testimony, he writes findings of fact, recommended conclusions, or actual conclusions, and hands them to both attorneys. He makes the decision. And John Spellman tells me in over 90% of those times, the lawyers do not appeal. Parties do not appeal because now they have a record that the assembly will not overturn these professionals.
But this is a step between the commission and the assembly.
That's right. So if we were able to accomplish that, we would take off the assembly all that time that they devote to land matters, which are critical around here.
You see, I don't really agree on a full-time legislative body if you can avoid it. Some of these things are in my estimation, avoidable. Because as soon as you go to a full-time legislative body, then you have eliminated a great deal of expertise that you might gain in the community by electing Jack Roderick or Frank Reed or Joel Dilks or Arliss Sturlowski or Sherry Holmes or somebody else to that legislative body. And not necessarily that they're so expert, but I think you lose a lot of contact with people.
It's okay for us on
You get a lot of housewives.
You've got what you've got down in Juneau, damn near a full-time legislative body.
Sure.
And I think your level of expertise drops.
What I'm trying to relate in the planning and zoning field to the utility field, it would be possible, it seems to me, to set up a commission of some sort that would deal with the nuts and bolts of running the utilities, as Norm suggests, so that the assembly would not have to be passing on every one of these contracts, every one of these day-to-day decisions. You could have a utility manager who would go to this commission to build a budget, help him build a budget in the utility field. Of course, the budgets would come to the assembly, but on a day-to-day basis, they could probably operate. I would not have them operating separate from the executive branch.
Oh, Rick, I wonder if we were to write in as a question of intent in the municipal utilities section the provision for a utilities board or boards, would the future assembly be able to delegate unlimited powers to that board? Would we have to speak in the charter to specific powers that the body may give?
Well, let me see now. If we don't say anything about it in the charter, I think they can certainly create an advisory board under the general power to create boards and commissions and so forth. Whether they could delegate final decision-making power to a board without some sort of authorization, I'm really not sure of, and I don't think that commission comments by themselves would have any effect on that legal power one way or the other. And I would think if we have in mind a commission which will exercise power, it should probably be stated in the body
that they may delegate certain powers, if they wish, to the commission.
If we speak under boards and commissions to the assembly by ordinance may provide for regulatory, appellate, or quasi-judicial boards or commissions, I wonder what we've said. We, of course, are talking in terms of the Board of Examiners and Appeals, the Planning Commission, you know, and their building board, and there are several others that have some quasi-judicial and, you know, more than an advisory power. And I'm just wondering if that section...
Maybe that is broad enough to cover what Jack was talking about.
In between.
Would it be called quasi-judicial? Would it be called quasi-judicial?
Regulatory.
Regulatory.
Then we better add one other word in there.
Regulatory.
We do have the word regulatory. Regulatory, appellate, or quasi-judicial is presently there.
That language probably suffices to deal with questions of unlawful or excessive delegation of legislative power. In other words, we are authorizing that degree of delegation of legislative power.
What degree?
Well, the degree to function as a regulatory, quasi-judicial, or an appellate thing along the lines of the agencies you just mentioned.
Well, really, you shouldn't be delegating what I see as a true legislative power. You only delegate the functioning of that power, the doing of what has been set down by the legislative body. Go do this thing.
But they've got to follow the budget.
And you've got an administrator that's supposed to do it, but sometimes there's a in between where he's got to have somebody to turn to other than running down to the legislative body every 15 minutes and saying, can I buy 2 thimbles for the sewing machine?
Maybe we're saying it here. If we want to consider maybe adding something to that utilities, that they may establish boards there to set out intent. I don't know.
What type of thing are you envisioning? Excuse me.
Really, in a sense, what Jack is, in terms that...
A utilities commission, sort of like the planning commission, in other words.
Which is an advisory.
In a sense, it is, isn't it? Yeah, right, but doesn't the planning commission exercise power?
It exercises power in certainly I would say quasi-judicial power in the sense that we are, unless appealed, we
it's not
take final
advisory in
action.
the sense that the city electrical commission is, for instance.
No.
Well, I think if you're only talking about that degree of power, then it would be authorized under the language that we put in intending to cover things like the Charter Commission. If you're talking about something really Port Authority type thing with something in the nature of absolute power, then you would probably need a more specific authorization to delegate.
I'm not interested in transferring absolute power, control of money, control of policy, and everything else. I'm interested in my standpoint, and seeing that the administrative work remains administrative work and doesn't get mixed up with the legislative work.
If one sets the threshold on their authority for procurement high enough, up to a certain point where it's, 10, 20, 25,000, you've knocked out all the nickels and dimes and...
Well, have we
things of that
allowed,
sort.
have we allowed the assembly to do that, the way we have our finance section? They establish procedures by ordinance, so you could, I would think, in certain areas, make those figures higher.
Yeah, I like to repeat one thing, is that if you wipe out those items we talk about from a borough assembly or a city council agenda, there's nothing left. Local government, by very nature, affects the citizen in the most intimate way in land management and things of this sort. And what is a citizen of the local government looking for? He's interested in sewer, water, electricity, things of this sort. They're very close to home, and all the other. What are the major issues that an assembly speaks to? Except those. There's nothing left except minutiae. They really don't have anything else left to do. These are the fundamental decisions.
Well, they could spend 3 months on the budget.
Yeah, the budget would have nothing, but wouldn't have anything. You take out sewer utility, and you take out a few more things, and you don't have much.
You can run the sewers.
Sewer utility,
Again,
same idea. Sewer,
I don't think you can take the budget away and say the budget power will rest with the final passage of the budget for the utility will rest with the utility board. I think they've got to recommend a budget. Their administrator prepares a budget. They review it and they recommend it to the assembly. When it gets to the assembly, it is a policy matter whether the income and the revenue and the expansion program is within the power of is what the assembly wants to do. They're the board of directors for that utility, the final board of directors.
why can't the assembly, or whatever the legislative name would be, do that? Let utility manager prepare the budget. It's ruled upon, and then there's an awful lot of flexibility available to the utility manager once that budget is passed.
Well,
the day-to-day actions are his.
Well, this is fine if the day-to-day actions are totally given back to them, the administration and running of it. But
in the city, I think, the city council, I'm surprised at how often, say, Jack Harris has to come back for approval. We don't have that out at the borough. Of course, we don't run the utilities either, except for the sewer.
The sewer utilities is a bigger operation than the water utility, and there's very little impact except for major policy decisions by the assembly. The assembly doesn't get into it at all.
Which is, I think the commission is in agreement that we don't want the super port authority kind of thing, that we want to allow the assembly the flexibility to have a commission similar to the planning commission. And maybe the only question we need to resolve is whether we will do as we did in the planning section and say there shall be a utility commission constituted as provided by law, or just leave it up to the discretion of the utility people. I had one question relating to the hearing in Girdwood that we had last night, and then I'd like to hear Harry's comments that he's made. The question came up regarding the land in Girdwood, that they have selected
10%.
Their 10% selected land, and what happens to that as an asset? Do you know? I mean, does that stay with them?
Under this asset section.
Well, as we understand now, for instance, although all things go to the borough, that in a service area they would still, I'll go with the new government, excuse me, but that the assets and liabilities would stay within a service area. But would this be true within the city of Girdwood, which would be
See,
dissolved?
they point with pride that they have about 320 selected acres plus some others that they figure is worth about $4 million. And it's an asset, they have assets and no liabilities, and they have everything to lose and nothing to gain by coming for unification. And they repeat that for your ingestion. And
Nothing we do will change the vote.
No, but it's a question that we ought to look into.
Yeah, it deserves an answer.
It's questionable whether they are a valid claim in the first place. They come behind the borough in the selection.
And so if you select it all up, they don't have
And
any...
we have selected it all up, and we haven't come to a resolution with the state yet. Any on their claims would come behind ours.
The state has given them quit claim deed, though they haven't given us quit claim deed.
I think we stepped aside for them and helped them get that first-class city.
But they have a new claim in mind. Are they talking about the original one?
The original ones that they have.
We, I think, stepped aside.
Yeah, they had some additional ones that they had.
So I don't know what to answer.
Yeah. That's one that was raised. We'd like to find an answer for them. Do you think
Perhaps
Rick and Gary might?
Yeah, it's certainly something that can be taken care of in transition provisions, and however, once a decision is made,
would it remain as a service district asset?
Well, this
or
we don't
we
know.
told them we checked.
I would think it remains as a service area as. Anything they have.
That is our impression, but we
would like to be able to state
legal to tell us.
Tom Leach.
Oh, okay.
In a related thing, I have sympathy for their position that they lose their status as a unique entity by becoming part of a unified group. Someone commented after that meeting, well, don't think it's all negative for them. They do have polluted streams and things down there. Someone reminded me. But I wish I could offer some more reassurance. They said, what have we got to gain? And the service district concept being written in, and also the community council concept being written in, we felt were positives for them. I really don't see how we can, do you see any, they even suggested maybe a satellite city hall down in the Greatwood area. They say there's 40 miles difference between their government with the parallel between Washington and the left being drawn.
I'd like one out in West Turnigan too, please.
Well, I think there is a difference. We've got to face the geographical fact that there is a 40-mile difference between us and Girdwood and the Eagle River to some extent. There is 10 miles of military land that no one grows on. So those two geographical facts we just have to recognize. I think that's where the community council really becomes involved. I think elected community council in those two areas makes sense. I would not hope that we wouldn't have an East Muldoon elected council, but who knows? That's up to the assembly, as I read this. Assembly would make a determination.
Jack, one of the thoughts that I thought might help them, but it didn't get much response one way or the other, really, was that if there were larger service area votes proposed that would include them, that since they are detached, I couldn't see where it would cause any harm if we put in the charter that it would also have to pass in their area to include them in the service and the taxation. Can you see where it would cause any harm to the overall area if they wanted out of any area-wide service?
You're talking about a dual majority to include?
Well, sort of, that they couldn't be en masse taken in as the South Potter Creek area was taken into the fire service area. It's quite obvious that it's beyond 8 minutes, probably beyond 10 minutes response time for a fire station, and yet they're going to be paying fire tax this time.
Well, hopefully this charter will be in existence without any changes for 25 years. I would hate to write the dual majority into a charter because I don't think it and ultimately it probably will be struck down, I would assume. But in any event, Girdwood will be treated differently from any other area in the borough, just by...
They would, just by the fact that they are separate, I'm sure, but...
We'll have to go down there. Anybody running the government will have to have some sort of communication, some sort of input from the community. If anyone sits up here and thinks they're going to run Girdwood, they're crazy, you know. That's like trying to run Cordova from Anchorage. It's that much different.
Oh, sure.
You know, people living down there because they want to.
They kept telling us, reminding
Yes,
us.
we've heard it. I assume we'll hear that a lot more before we...
Go rubber.
Yes, you go Rupert. Harry, you said that you had some comments, and I think maybe at this point...
Page 7.
Page 7. Gee, we got through.
Give us the title,
I already made
The numbers?
numbers, please, what's the number of the section?
section 403B.
Oh, it always makes me nervous when people get so specific.
That's what I asked for.
The Assembly by ordinance shall adopt standards and procedures for removal of the mayor from office, including provision for notice, public hearing, and judicial review. My point is that's a nice, easy way of removing shared powers. And it seems to me that it's just too simple. And there should be rather precise impeachment procedures. 'Cause this
In the
could be-
charter?
This could be done just cavalierly.
Let's see.
And I just think we talk about a strong mayor, and this gives, by adopting the most inane standards and procedures, or they don't like the tie he's wearing for 3 days in a row,
You're
they
saying
remove
this should
him
be in
off.
the charter rather than...
I really do. I believe that it's at the heart of the issue of a strong executive, that they can't remove him for office except for, some sort of impeachment language.
We
I
did
don't know
go
what it
through
is,
a
but it
long Donnybrook concerning mental incapacity and all. There was a lot of this. And I think that this was the result of not being able to agree on whether mental incapacity should be in the charter or not.
Doesn't the
There would
judicial
be-
review, if you have to provide for judicial review, how would you avoid that judicial review, and what would judicial review cover?
You remove them from office rather haphazardly, and then you go through about 6 months of court things, and then you reinstate the mayor. And what has happened in the meantime?
You
Chaos.
had a council manager, form of government
No, you really have chaos, I think, in a sense.
Well, it was spelled out in the previous charter, vacancy and death, resignation, removal from office, and, very specifically. And we really hung up about that problem of, again, being the same thing with assembly. Do we spell out in minutia, as you're saying, both for the assembly and for the mayor, or do we leave it up for the standard things? Rick, didn't you feel that was an area pretty much where there were fairly well established reasons for being allowed to remove either assembly or executive from office, and that it was perhaps appropriate to handle it this way?
Well, to tell you the truth, Arliss, I had proposed in my draft several, I believe,
Specific.
a short laundry list. Yes, I believe that was my initial feeling, that there should be some sort of specifics.
We don't always listen to you, Molly.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe we ought to go back and listen.
Well, anyway, I point out as an area I think is just a little too loose and does strike at the very heart of a strong executive form of government. I think there might be some language in the state of which I'm not aware. I don't know how the state treats it. We know how the federal government treats it. And there might be certain language in other jurisdictions that is useful. I don't know.
What would you list as,
Well, I don't know, maybe we don't like the ones of mental incapacity and moral turpitude and some of these others, but there are certain terms that even if we don't like them, promotes dissent. You might want to get rid of that person. They're an annoyance. And I'm not certain that's where the people's interests are served.
And make it longer.
I think your point's well taken.
I hear you, and I see the reason. It's going to make the charter longer.
Yeah.
Well, maybe there's other areas we can
I
cut
got
it
one
one
other
down.
short one.
Okay.
On the same vacancy, 403D, when a vacancy occurs, the President of the Assembly shall act as serve as acting mayor until a successor is elected and take office. In such instance, he or she will vacate their position. In other words, it would be incompatible to serve both on the Assembly and as acting mayor. I would say during that interim period, they will not serve in a legislative capacity. Because you can see that the voting on the Assembly and acting as an executive simultaneously, I don't think
Boy,
it's
they'd
good.
have a bit of power then, wouldn't they?
I would think so.
He relinquishes his legislative vote during that period.
That was, whatever the appropriate language is, I think it would be proper.
Glad to see you were using a fine comb there, Mr. Donahue.
Well, I think they are, they relate to the heart of the matter.
Yeah,
That's right. I've been
Very
concerned
good,
mostly,
very good comment.
mostly with not so much what we have said, but what we might not have said that
Yeah.
we should have.
On page 8, 4.06, Administrative Code, I'm really pleased to see this. We had devised the Administrative Procedures Act for the borough, and so far we never took it up, and I think out of fear of what it supposedly was and was not, I think this is extremely important to prevent bureaucratic overuse of their powers. And I think that's an extremely fine section. Again, vacancies on the school board, I think all the more so here where you have two elected bodies, you see where is school?
93.
The assembly is again placed too much in catbird seat.
Number
Moving school, on page 14, 903. And I just think it should be more circumscribed.
Do you think the same standard could apply for all vacancies? School board, assembly, mayor,
I would
everything?
think so,
You can make
yes.
a general provision on
That's
vacancies
probably the best
if we
deal.
go that route.
Division heads and so forth, or rather department heads and such like?
I think otherwise it provides the removal of boundaries, which I don't think is what should be intended. Right.
Apparently they can be taken care of in other ways after divorce.
At least experience seems to be.
I think they should be allowed to exist because they provide a useful
Catalyst
purpose.
for
Yeah, this is
dissension.
how someone spoke
They
to
may occasionally be the only one right.
They liked the borough city squabble because it presented certain adversary aspects of government that were important.
Page 15,
Section?
section 907, budget and 6-year plan. I don't know if there's anything good about 5, 6, or 7-year plan. It would seem to me a mid-range or long-range program for capital improvements. I don't know why there's anything sacrosanct but 6 years. Various municipalities
One
use
of
different
the
amounts.
reasons for a 6-year plan for reference to education is that your schooling usually starts at age 6, and you have in view at that time all the way back to birth. You can tell how many people you're going to have. You can make some definitive plans because you know your in-migration, your out-migration, your birth rate, and the number of children present in the district or area at that time. And so you can make some definitive plans for the future.
Never had either.
Never did either.
That's,
Well, one other thing is that you consider, 1 year an operating budget and then your standard 5-year, you're really talking of
That's
it.
probably why it was 5 years.
That makes sense, but I have the same comment when it's non-school also.
Yeah,
You again
well,
talk 6
yeah.
years.
Again, in the non-school, that's a different, somewhat different
But I
story.
think the idea is there without narrowing it down
One
to
way or
6
another.
years.
Yeah.
The bottom of the page, finance. This fiscal year bothers me. I see why, with a new fresh start, we can't embark upon a reconciliation of the years. And as a possible compromise, why not the federal government, on whom we lean and are going to be leaning for the next billion years, is going in October. It would seem to me you would back one back and one forward, and you would arrive
They are going
fairly well.
Yeah, that's true.
We did discuss this with the finance directors, and they want very strongly to see this particular approach used. The school budget year is prohibited by state law from changing, and there's some very good reasons for the school simply because of their particular attendance period, why it works out well for them. There is a flexibility that there could be a change, but both felt that it would work so much better for the borough, say for the summer contracting, the setting of the mill, and levying the time you would do it, as far as just accommodating the work. And both of them feel very strongly it's a
The
way to
feds
go.
are going to October, is that
Right.
right?
Starting when?
Next year.
And we talked about that, about whether it would be wise to do that, and the consensus was that no, it didn't really matter that we be in concert with
Yeah.
the federal government, that so many of their funding things don't work on their fiscal year anyway. Now, you seem to have a different
They do work on
feeling.
their fiscal year. That's not correct. We get funding based on their fiscal year, and I think that we're going to be in a pickle if we have this mix-up here. And I know mine's a minority position, but I wonder whether anyone asked either of them what we're going to do about this school. We keep putting off this idea of playing catch-up and trying to do it. Each year the assembly toys with it and then plays that Scarlett O'Hara tomorrow.
Well, it would take a state legislation.
Half a mil to catch up, and we don't. And
Yeah.
sooner or later, someone's going to have to do it because it's an anomaly, and no one has really faced up to it.
As to the municipalities' fiscal year, could you chat with Norm Levesque and
sure.
get back to us?
Yeah,
on
I'd be
it?
happy.
I think what we're considering doing in this section is making a general statement that the Assembly will do the fiscal year by ordinance and have a year for change, and moving the specific references to the dates into the transition section.
We already have the specific reference in
Yeah, we may be
the
able.
partial
Uh-huh.
in the transition in 16 and 06.
But we'd like, it would be so nice if everyone would agree, we'd just go.
I was going to say on this one, I'd rather not. I speak more definitely on that one because they're the persons who have the expertise, and they've lived with it longer, and it seemed to me you have enough other problems to solve besides that.
I was just curious, Mr. Chairman. Harry, assuming that we're stuck with the school's fiscal year under state law, which is at least...
According to Norm, we are.
Yeah. Do you think it would be better to conform the municipality's fiscal year to the school district's year
Then
or to the
everybody's-
federal government's year if we were going to make a change?
I like this reserve comment.
Okay.
The argument that both Bob and Norm gave us were that the time to have your end of your fiscal year was in the slow time of year, and that with the utilities and with road construction, the slow time of year was in the winter. And that with the slow time of year with schools was between the end of school and the beginning of school. It was not during the school when it was actually in session. And that ideally for a fiscal officer, that they wanted their fiscal years to end during the slow time of the year so that they had time to get rid of the book work before they started in with contracting and so forth
I
again.
think the answer on both of them is conservatism, and I can see their point entirely. If they had a new, fresh start, I doubt that either one of them would come to this position. They're all worried about the transition, I think deservedly
Yeah.
so, and so that's really, they're the ones that are gonna have to make it work. And I think that's, they wanna make the transition as smoothly as possible.
This is what Vern Johnson, the CPA, who was involved in the auditing
He'd
process,
suggested the government
he
figure.
said that the split year is bad, that the auditing costs probably are up because they are separate years, and that make it a general government year of some kind. It means 2 financial reports and everything.
Yeah, but we've got 3
Yeah.
literally going now, or at least 2. We've allowed flexibility for change to be done by ordinance and with only 1 year, and I think
It may create chaos, but they have the flexibility.
My comment on page 18, I've already spoken to about this $1 million.
Right.
I'm just inherently more of a populist that thinks that things should go to the vote more often. And that gives a lot of leeway, $1 million for an area of this size. And I think there is a possibility if you can't do it by vote, you do it other ways. So like you can't get park bond for the mill levy, this type of thing. I think it's
in 10 years, $1 million may not be as much as it is now.
Really?
Still $1 million.
2 years now. The next one I have is on page 23, and I just wondered why the
Number?
14.01 equal rights.
Okay.
Why invidious was put in there. I think discrimination, that word is buried in discrimination. It means prejudicial and what seems to be redundant.
You don't like that meat word, Harry?
I think wherever possible you shouldn't have adjectives anyhow.
Well,
don't know how we've gone over
I don't
this
want to presume to speak for Rick, but I think the invidious meant to qualify that there are certain kinds of discrimination which are allowed if they're done on a rational basis, but what you want to get rid of is that discrimination which has no rational basis.
Well, I think by common usage, discrimination.
I usually cut my trips short to the bed.
But you learned that laughter. That's your invidious. He wants to do away with invidious.
I think discrimination has now come to mean invidious. It's buried in the word.
I don't think so.
And it's a purist. I said all I want on that one.
Does it have a legal meaning?
Invidious? Yes. I mean, it's the word that the courts use all the time when they're talking about the type of discrimination which is proscribed by the Equal Protection
He
Clause,
really cares.
as opposed to those types of discrimination which are inherent in making classifications in government. We make many, many types of discrimination based on many, many factors.
The Department of Law shall hire lawyers.
Well, discrimination to carry out this kind of giving my speech on this, but the example that comes up, we say in this ordinance that you can't discriminate, for instance, on the basis of religion. Well, there are reasons maybe for the Salvation Army to require that its employees adhere to certain religious tenets, and somebody, in fact, under EEO, it has been raised as a case under the federal Title VII that the Salvation Army could not refuse to hire somebody on the basis that that person was a cow deist or something. And the use of the term invidious is intended to short-circuit that type of problem.
I'll fall back on the political joke, and I think viscerally that this will lose votes because someone's liable to see and hear, well, a little bit of discrimination is all right, just don't do too much of it.
What I read
And I have a feeling that to minorities, they might see that and see something wrong in the charter.
Yeah, that's exactly what I heard over here, that certain discriminations are okay.
Now, let's say...
Sure.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, but they mean certain bad ones. It's enough of red flag.
Well, if you want to change invidious to bad, that's okay.
I think that word's got class. Real class.
I have no other comment. I just agree.
Maybe the mayor, we
cut him off
Isn't that good?
Now, we'll let Jack have some more saying, huh?
I have very few, and I didn't unfortunately go over it probably as carefully as Harry, but in the conflict of interest on page 23, section 14.03. Now, I didn't check this out carefully, but you're using the borough terminology or city terminology, a substantial financial interest. I look at the borough code and really shake my head. Isn't there better terminology in the state law now that really pins that down?
Yeah, they have numbers. You know, as I understand the state conflict law, it deals with dollar amounts of property holdings. You have to report sources of income over $100 is what you have to do, or real estate over 500 or something of that sort.
No, you have to report all real estate, all stocks and bonds, not as to quantity.
Yeah.
Any source of income over 100.
Well, again, I haven't, and there's no mention of campaign disclosures. My only suggestion then would be either make it very general or very specific. I think we're in the middle ground again. When people look at the borough statute or ordinance, they get scared because they don't know what it means.
Well, here, it was my understanding that what we meant by this prohibition shall be implemented in the manner provided by law, that we are saying that the state statute would apply.
Well, the state statute by its terms does apply unless we opt out by a vote of the people. And this term by law, of course, is a recognition of that fact, plus a reservation of the possibility of changing it in certain particulars by ordinance if state law at some point permitted that to be done. But
If we opt out, what have we, if the community opts not to follow, what does this...
What this permits is for the assembly by ordinance to state these particulars that Jack's talking about, I think.
I didn't
Do you understand the picture anyway?
I know what the existing law is, right?
At the state.
At the local level, it's no good. It's nothing.
Yeah, and if we opt out at the local level, then the thought, I assume, is that the assembly should definitely have the power to make more specific this general concept that we're talking about.
My understanding of this was that the disclosure of financial interests would be the same as it is if you hold a state position. And that once having filing of your reporting of your financial interests, and then once having made that report, when you sit on a body, whenever you have a substantial financial interest, and I think we put the word substantial in there so that it didn't get down to one share of Polaroid stock if a new identifying system is being purchased for the government. Then it requires an affirmative vote of the body to allow you to participate. Now, do you still have a problem with the word substantial in that?
People have asked, what is substantial financial interest?
Well, I think
That's always
that has
the question.
to be defined in the,
Can we define it?
Queen said Nelson Hundred is what I say.
Well, substantial to me might be different than substantial to...
Yeah, $500, $1,000,
It's
$100.
either what the state law says, or it's what the Borough Assembly enacts under this provision. As I see it, I don't believe this was intended to be freestanding and final as the standard.
I really feel we should go back in and either specify that there will be by ordinance numbers filled in for such this. But the reason we really didn't was in these inflating times was...
Today's standard may be tomorrow's popsicle month.
That's what I mean.
That's right. I assume you think this is going to be reinforced by ordinance, wouldn't you? Think so?
Yeah.
In that case, and that it merely provides the overarching philosophy.
Right.
Or that will stand the test of a few years.
Will the borough be bringing an issue do you feel, to exempt us? The city, I think, was talking.
I understand that.
What? To exempt them from the requirements of the state law regarding conflict of
What do we do if the city votes to exempt, the borough does not vote to exempt prior to a vote on the charter? What happens to
You
the...
don't have a vote coming out, do you, before then?
Well, we
don't
don't
know.
know exactly when the charter is going to be on the ballot.
Or if it's going to be.
It might
If the charter's on the ballot on August 12th.
So was I.
This one supersedes.
Yeah, but if we end up with October as the date, and the city election has to be held, think about it.
I have a question that the mayor brought up about campaign disclosure, because the state does require that everybody disclose, but there is no limit put on how much people can spend in local elections. They can spend as much as they want. So could we put in something where, similar to conflict of interest, if they would enact an ordinance, putting limitations on, the campaign disclosure?
Certainly can. What do you think, Guy? Should or should?
Well, I just base it on the fact that I don't see any difference between a local elected official and a state elected official. They're both elected.
Agreed.
And I just don't see that there's any difference.
So you would add a statement on limitation of expenditure, campaign expenditure.
Abby, have you met both Mayor Roderick and Harry Donahue? Abby Walters, our hard-working executive secretary.
Okay.
I think what limitations would you talk about then on local elections? As much as that provided for state elections, $17,000.
You would leave it up to the legislative
Oh,
body.
wait a minute. We already have to adhere to the...
We have
Only
to
to an
report it.
extent.
Yeah.
I had to report, anyway, I was informed I had to report on the charter commission how much I expended.
You had to report how much you
So
spended.
you
But
see,
it
we're already
doesn't put
covered.
a limit on it.
What limit?
It doesn't limit how much you
Doesn't
can
limit
spend.
how much you
Yeah, but are you talking about a limit on spending or reporting?
No, I'm interested in reporting it.
Yeah, well, we
I
have
think
to do
we
that already.
We already have to do that by the
Yeah,
state
we
law.
do.
At least that was my understanding.
But that's one thing we need to check, but I am sure I don't think we're
I
exempt.
thought you were talking about a limitation on campaign spending.
On campaign spending, in the primary.
Why
for
not,
governor.
why not a limit on
About
campaign spending?
$78,000.
You're shaking your head.
That's all right, I can shake my head.
If you can draft it, that it will last for 25 years.
Yeah.
Well, no, I would just perhaps consider having the assembly by ordinance
You can
set
draft
a limit on
So campaign expenditure limits.
You can draft it to last, if you want to set a fixed amount, you can set the fixed amount and
$100,000.
shall be escalated in accordance with the cost of living survey.
There's nothing inherently. You can see Joe Baflisk running against Brigitte Bardot. You may have a handicapped overcome. You have to spend more money.
Yeah.
Sally Glutz running against Gregory Peck may have the same problem.
Who's Gregory Peck? I know the Glutz guy.
I saw Gregory the other night, young, handsome, and it was marvelous. Turned back the time.
I like to hear Gregory Peck speaking somewhat Japanese.
Dubbed in. Yeah.
No kidding?
Oh, boy,
Gunsmoke
the same way.
Like
he was saying. I don't know what he was saying. John spoke the same way. James Arnett doing his thing.
Okay, where are we? I think we're disintegrating.
Yes, I
How
do
about
too.
on legislation, introduction, and enactment, and ordinance? How do you
yeah.
feel about section B, which says the mayor may cause an ordinance to be
Where are you?
introduced? 601B,
Thank you.
the mayor may cause an ordinance to be introduced. Each such ordinance shall state by the chairman of the assembly at the request of the mayor.
Well, I asked, I think, Arliss and Sherry at one of the assembly meetings about that. First off, it should be, I guess, the president of the assembly, just to type the draft for him.
No, they as the chairman.
Chairman? Okay. I'm sorry. I really, I've forgotten the answer to that.
I think that you felt it was no problem. You show now it was the person introduced. There's no reason you still couldn't have under that the department or the individual that requested it. This is merely a matter of form, that it would state by the chairman of the assembly at the request of the mayor, and then underneath it you could put your department or your individual. In other words,
Indicate where the ordinance originated.
yeah, it shows that the assembly does start the ordinances.
Yeah, it says the mayor may cause an ordinance to be introduced.
Yeah,
I mean, he has to have that power
Oh,
else
sure.
it's neutralized. But it is an assembly meeting
Right.
at which they act.
Yeah.
Each ordinance shall state by the chairman of the assembly at the request of the mayor. It's fine. It's a mandatory kind of thing. I don't see any problem with that view. Just a form. We have, as a matter of form, also that Assemblywoman Crowley asked us to be introduced.
Like the federal government, we introduce about 95% of all the things, and so does the executive branch of the federal government, but they have to go through into the hopper by the imprimatur of some congressman.
So you have said in your introduction that generally you think it's good. Do you think the balances and checks are fairly comfortably weighed?
If you've given authority to the executive and you've given authority to the assembly, and they're well drafted, I don't think you've lost anything anywhere. You haven't crossed each other up so that they're vague as to where their lines are going, as I read it.
Enacting each of these different sections, has enough guidance been given to the legislative body as to what they should do, or, how they should operate, or should it be left open? Just say the assembly shall do this.
Well, the assembly makes the laws, not the legislature. And the governor or the executive submits his budget and his legislation.
Yeah, I'd like to hear his comments on that.
I think, from what I read, it's clear. I see no problem.
I've got Gary, well, Jack too, but...
We've put in section 602, subsection 8, which is on page 11, that conveying an interest in real property dedicated to public park or recreation purposes requires a vote. Is that overly restrictive? Any comments?
Gary Thurlow feels it's unnecessary with the interest people have in parks, and he feels that with changing, say, of school sites and concentrations of population parks, that it may be desirable to sell and to move on. He thinks that the public would be receptive enough to offer
To do
protection.
it without an ordinance.
Well, no, not without an ordinance, but
Well,
without a
this
vote
is-
of the people.
All this is an ordinance.
Oh, no, this is in 8 now. It says
602 subsection 8.
6028, the
Well,
second sentence.
Only upon, an ordinance is valid only upon approval by a majority of those voting on the question.
Did we
You
give
didn't finish your sentence, sir.
6028? Well, maybe we made a mistake in the...
No, it's there.
Yep.
Is
I
there?
think that's unnecessarily, I should have caught that. It seems to me if we're going to dedicate, for example, a foreclosure sale, you pick up a mini park of an acre and you want to put on a tennis court or a paddle tennis or even a basketball court, you have to go to people.
No,
No, it says
It
if you
says-
sell it.
for selling it.
Convey, oh, I'm sorry, okay.
Selling. This prevents New Naco Valley's Park going out the door with,
No, it wouldn't have, because that was not ever designated as a park.
if it had been definitely dedicated.
Well, once it was, if it was PLI and, or dedicated as a park, and then it were sold, it would have to go.
I see nothing wrong with it at all.
Uh-huh.
It seemed to me if you're going to have a park, it should be dedicated in perpetuity. And if not, then there ought to be it should be so rare, it should go to the people. With you.
There's an old park man over there.
Well, that was why we put it in, I think, but we had gotten some negative feedback. Anything else from?
Anything on the political thing you'd like to say about either timing or assistance in how we might move ahead? There's a citizens group that will be working toward assisting us more with the idea of going to groups to get their support. And the commission, of course, is willing to just kill itself if they haven't getting this far to sell it without any big flashy campaign, of course. But do you have any thoughts you'd like to pass along how we can make this more than our every couple of years that we try at invitation?
Well, I sense that the momentum is